Well, good morning, Multicultural Bible Ministry. My name is Malcolm. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's a joy to be able to open up this word which was just read for us. Now, I am something of a dreamer, and when I say a dreamer, I don't sit out there and sort of just ponder life. I love to have dreams while I'm in bed and asleep. And I'm one of those people who actually remembers dreams, and I get so involved in the dreams, I want to keep dreaming. There's been times where I've woken up and I'm giggling, and I'm not sure always why, but it's so exciting, and I hit the snooze button because I want to get back into that world. I've dreamt of climbing Mount Everest. I've dreamt of going on great adventures. There's been times where I wake up and I'm not sure where I am. Now, one of the team members this week, I'm going to not include his name, he was sharing about his deep love for chicken. And I'm not going to tell you which staff member was involved in this, but somebody from church generated an AI image of this. There are some dreams that are just beautiful. But then there are other dreams where I wake up and I am terrified. You see, some dreams I wake up and it's a dream normally that goes along the same way. I dream that my alarm clock hasn't gone off and I'm late for an important meeting and I'm filled with dread and panic. I've had dreams, I think many of us have done this, where you dream that your big day at school for the exam is there and you wake up and you realize I'm late and you find yourself running to the exam totally unprepared. I think one of the worst dreams I have is that I'll be sitting there and I sometimes dream of MBM, and I'll be at MBM church and Mike will be up the front or Nate leading the singing, and then Ethan will come to me and say, "Here's the microphone, you're up next." And I thought, hang on, I thought Mark Boyley was preaching today. And I'm filled with panic because I am not prepared. In life, generally, we like to be people who are prepared. We like to be prepared for work presentations. We like to prepare annual budgets. We like to prepare for exams. We like to prepare to host people in our homes. But in preparation, we find a confidence that we know what we are doing. But in life, there are some things we need to be more prepared for and other things that don't matter as much. You see, it's important that you are preparing yourselves, if you're a young person, for a career, and that is more important than preparing a dessert. Preparing to marry someone is more important than preparing a PowerPoint presentation. Preparing for your end of tax year tax return is more important than preparing your weekly footy tips. You see, in life, it is important that we want to be prepared. But when we think about spiritual issues, the reality is that one day you need to be prepared and I need to be prepared to give an account of our life. We don't want to turn up on Judgment Day and stand before God and be unprepared, having not used the gifts that He has given us. Over these 3 weeks, we are considering generosity, and we are considering how, as God's people, we ought to respond to Him with generous hearts, generous hands, because the reality is that one day you will stand before God and He will say, "I've given you gifts, I've placed you in a context, I've given you certain talents, what have you done with them?" So this morning, here's what we're going to do in just a moment. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to look at a parable, and Jesus is going to tell us a story that's going to help us ask and answer this question. How can we live wisely now in preparation for Jesus' return? How can we live wisely now in preparation for Jesus' return? So we're going to walk through the parable, answer that question, and then reflect on what that has to do with us. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for your word, and I pray now as we open it, that you might speak to our hearts, that you might challenge us afresh with how generous you've been to us, but Lord, that you would also challenge us to respond in faithfulness, for we ask this for Jesus' sake. Amen. Now, Jesus was the master storyteller. You read any of his parables, any of the stories that he gives his people, And Jesus, what he does then and what he does now, he draws us in because he wants to communicate truth. Jesus doesn't tell stories just for the sake of telling a good yarn. He tells us stories because he wants to help us understand who God is and who we are. And so in Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story here to his disciples to help them understand better how they might live now in light of his return, how they might be prepared for Jesus' return. Listen to how the story begins in verse 14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. Our story here revolves around a couple of groups. It's really the one man who is the king. He is the owner of the house, and he has resources. We're going to find out a little bit more about this man. But it's going to be his interaction with three different servants. And in this story that Jesus tells, it would have been very easily pictured in his day. The goal of the story was for you and me, the listener, to see ourselves in one of the three servants. But first, as we start, let's think about the king who is involved here, or the person who is involved here. It says that he was going on a journey. Now, we don't know where this guy was going. We get no indication for how long he was going. We don't know the purpose of his visit. We don't know his name. We actually don't know a lot about this man, but there are at least three things that we can work out about this guy. First of all, he has servants. He has servants, which would indicate that he is a man of significance. This guy is a man of significance. There are three things that tip us off. First of all, as I said, he has servants. In the ancient world, there were few people who were well off. Most worked hard, most worked as peasants in fields, picking food, cooking. And many people in that day, because of their impoverished nature, they had to earn shekels. So what they would do, they would go and work for somebody. They would go work for a master, and they would be a servant. Now, if you were well off, you might have a servant, okay? You might say, hey, I've got somebody at my house. They're going to help prepare the meals. They're going to do X, Y, and Z. This guy doesn't have one servant. He has servants, plural. He has more than one, three that are highlighted here. That would indicate that this man was fairly significant. But we also see that he had wealth. In this story, we're not talking about, yeah, man, this guy has a really nice camel or he's got a nice water view up there at Galilee. This guy has considerable wealth, and it is shown through the bags of money that he is going to entrust to his servants. Entrust bags of gold. And as we'll see, this is no small deal. This is a really big thing. But then thirdly, we also discover not only is this man significant, not only does he have wealth, he also has power. You see, when he comes home from his long journey, we'll discover he has the right to provide commendation, well done, good and faithful servant. But he also has the power to say, you've done a wicked thing, out with you, you're out. This guy was a person of power. So let's continue our story, and again, verse 14. This man goes away on a long journey. Perhaps he's going away for business. Perhaps he's going to invest in crops. Perhaps he's going for a season. Who knows what he's doing? But we read that he called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. He called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. You remember last week we looked at Corinthians, and we were reminded of the reality that God gives us all, everyone in this room, everything that we have. It is not 90% mine and 10% God's. It's 100% God's, and he entrusts it to us. This is the image here in the story. We have a man who has wealth, and he calls his servants, and he entrusts wealth to them. He says, here's my money. I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to put you in charge, and you are going to manage it for me. And so that's exactly what these people do. The servants never own the money. It is always the master's money, but he entrusts them to go away and steward it. Now let's look at what happens next, verse 25. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another one bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The owner has 3 servants and he gives them 3 different amounts. And he gives the first guy 5 bags of gold. Now, in this story, he entrusts these bags or these baskets of gold, and this is really significant. If you've got an older Bible, it might say in your Bible that he entrusts to them talents. Now, the problem when we hear the word talents, we think of Australia's Got Talent. Talent actually in the Bible, this particular word was used of a weight. And that was how they valued something, was how heavy it was. And in this case, you had 3 different types of weights, 3 different types of talents in the ancient world. There was gold, which weighed the most. Then there was silver, which weighed a little less. And then you had bronze, much like our Olympic medals. There was one that was more valued because of its weight. And so here we read that this man, the owner, gives out baskets or bags of talents. Now, just to put this into perspective, if you had 1 bag or 1 basket of gold, you were doing okay. In fact, you were doing pretty okay. If you had 2 baskets or bags, you were set up for life. If you had 5 baskets, you were absolutely loaded. Everyone was coming to you for a loan. And here's what happens in our story. We get the first guy. He has 5 bags of talents. And Bible scholars suggest that is probably about 100 years worth of salary. 100 years. And this guy says, I'm going to entrust you, a servant, with this. He says to the second guy, I'm going to give you 2 bags. That's about 40 years worth of the average wage. And then to the last guy, he gives 20 years worth of wage. This is a big responsibility that the master is entrusting. Then he goes away and he goes on his journey. And the question for the original audience and for you and I is, what are they going to do with this? This rich, generous master says to ordinary people, I'm going to put you in charge of certain things, and this is a big responsibility. All of you have responsibilities. The question is, what's going to happen when he returns? Well, look with me at verse 16. The man who, he responds here, the man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more, but the one who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. 3 servants, all given the same responsibility by the same master. Here's what I've entrusted to you, use it wisely. Now, the first servant put his money to work. I don't know what he invested in. Maybe he sold a field, maybe purchased some crops, maybe bought some fishing boats there on the Galilee. Who knows? But whatever the case is, when the master returns, he's got 5 bags of gold. He has doubled what he originally started with. Fantastic. The second servant, likewise, we don't know what he's invested in, but his result is the same. He goes out and maybe he puts some money into cattle or fishing or whatever, but he gets 2 bags of gold. And then we get to servant number 3. In contrast to the first 2, this guy takes his bag, he goes away, digs a hole, and buries it. Now, what is going on there? Why would you go and do this? Well, in the ancient world, they didn't really have massive security, even in your home. They didn't have the double locked doors there. And so what they would do, if somebody was really valuable, they might go away and somebody might dig a hole and put something valuable in the ground. But it was almost always a short-term solution. But as we'll see, it's not a very good way to use the master's money. He's given it to you, entrusted it to you, so that you would use it for something, and you've gone and done absolutely nothing with it. Next we read this, verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. The master's come back. He's now holding people to accounts. And he finds this guy who's responded appropriately. He has done what he should have done. He has invested what has been entrusted to him by his kind master, And the response of the master is one of absolute delight and pleasure. Verse 21, his master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." This is a great picture. He says, "That's amazing what you've done. I'm so pleased you've been so faithful for what I've given to you. Come, let's enjoy this time together." Person number 2, verse 22. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more." His master replied, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." The master's pleased. He entrusted this person, and they showed that they were good for it because they wisely utilized that which was given so generously to them. But then we get to verse 24, always a bit of a downer. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. "Master," he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you." The last servant comes and he is totally unprepared when his master returns. He's not been wise. He's not used what was entrusted to him. In fact, he comes up with this lame excuse. He actually blames his inactivity on the boss. He says, actually, it's your fault. Look again, he says, "I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown, gathering where you've not scattered seed, so I was afraid." Now, in ancient times, the master would go away, and because the world was precarious, sometimes the master didn't come back. And so maybe that's what this guy was hoping for. He was hoping that, well, I'll just use the money, or rather, I'll just set the money aside. I won't take my stewardship role very seriously, because really, is the master really going to come back? He might not. He says that's because you're a hard man. That's why I didn't do anything. Verse 26. His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I've not sown and gather what I have not scattered seed. Well then, if that is the case, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest." The master's actually calling his bluff here. If I'm a really hard man, as you say, why didn't you go to the bank and put it in the bank and get some interest on it? He's calling out his lame excuse. This guy was unprepared when the master returns. And what was the result of being unprepared? It was one of harsh judgment. Verse 28, the master says, "So take the bag of gold from him, give it to the one who has 10 bags, for whoever has will be given more, and they will have it in abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them, and throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." A harsh judgment for the person who is unprepared and not responsible with the talents and the gold and the wealth that was entrusted to them. Well, there we have it, a story powerfully given by Jesus to his friends in ancient times about money that was entrusted to stewards, and the question was one of responsibility. What would they do? Would they be prepared when the master returns? What are we to make of this? Well, I think before we focus in on our main point, I just want to step back, and there's at least a couple of things going on in this passage. The first thing I would suggest is this passage tells us that Jesus will leave and he will come again. You see, in this passage, when Jesus is giving this particular parable in Matthew 25, he is on the cusp of going away. He is going to go to the cross. And in fact, more than that, he is going to ascend a month or so later, and he's going to go to his Father's right hand, and he goes away, and he is still away. But just as our master has entrusted things to his people, he will come back again. Jesus is seen here as the master who gives responsibility to his people, but he will leave. He did leave, but he will come again. We also see here at a big picture, Jesus will hold people to account. Jesus will return, and when he returns, he is going to call all of us to give an account, to reflect on how have we been with the wealth and the generosity and the talents that he has given to us. Jesus will hold you to account. What you and I will see there, that there's a warning behind this, is we don't want to be the people on Judgment Day who turn up and say, oh, actually, I didn't really think you were coming back again. I didn't really use the time, treasure, and talents that you gave me. In fact, I didn't do much at all. The challenge in this passage is going to be not that just Jesus will go and come again, that we're reminded of that, but we will be given account of this. But that's going to lead us again back to our main question, which is the main thrust in some ways of the story. How can we live wisely now in preparation for Jesus' return? How can you live and I live in such a way that we are wise so that when Jesus returns, we are not like the guy with the stuff in the ground who says, sorry, I'm not ready? Well, I think the answer is found in two words: be faithful. We see this throughout the text. This is going to be one of the emphases. Be faithful. He's going to laud faithfulness as the quality that God is calling us to. And when we, over these 3 weeks, when we're thinking about generosity, we've not this year intentionally, we're not focusing on pledging. Now, that's not a bad thing. We've done that over many years. In fact, knowing who in our congregation, or the commitment level that you're going to make, is actually very helpful to us. Particularly helpful for us in regards to budget. But at the end of the day, this passage is not actually about an amount. It's not actually about a number. It is about an attitude. And so over these 3 weeks, that is what we are focusing on, is the attitude of our heart. And this passage is saying, when it comes to generosity, when it comes to what you've been entrusted to, there is one thing God is looking for. It's not a percentage. It's not a number amount. It is a faithful heart. Be faithful. Multiple times we see this. Look at verse 21 and 23. It says this: well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. You'll notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, well done, good and gifted servants. He doesn't say, well done, good and gifted Anglican servants, Baptist servants. He doesn't say, well done, good and socially well-known servants. What does he say? Well done, good and faithful servants. In this account, we get a glimpse of what God is calling and wanting from you and I, and that is faithfulness. He wants those servants who get given talents that belong to him and use them for his kingdom, for his glory, for the extension of what he does. As we were reminded last week, God has generously given to us all sorts of gifts. What we have comes from a generous God, but he is going to come back and he is going to ask us, how have we used his gifts? So what does it look like to be faithful? Particularly, what does it look like to be faithful at MBM? 3 things I want to mention to you today. Here at MBM, we want to be faithful and generous disciples. And I would suggest, first of all, I would encourage you to be faithful with your time. Be faithful with your time. Time is a commodity that many of us seem to run out of. As I mentioned in the start of the message, many of us wake up and we feel a bit like that panic of running to an exam where you're unprepared. And it feels like in life, we're always running from one thing to the next. One of my great fears when I actually travel is I put my alarm on, and nowadays it's electronic. It used to be the old wind-up clocks, and you'd hope the battery didn't run out. Or nowadays, my biggest fear is, did I put it on AM or PM? And if you've got an early flight or you're traveling early, my big fear is, you don't want to be running behind time, because you know what happens? You end up at the airport and you're running to a gate, and there's calls over the speaker that the gate is closing. And you know, if you miss your gate, you're not going to have that hotel that you booked, and there's going to be all sorts of complications. But many of us, I think, live life like this. We are time poor, not because we don't have time, but because we are unprepared and we don't plan very well. Some of us overcommit to things that we shouldn't, and we aren't wise with our time. Some of us place too much emphasis on leisure, on holidays, on good things. We place so much emphasis on them that we actually aren't wise with our time. Some of us waste time unending scrolling, binge watching TV, gaming, things in and of themselves that aren't bad, but do it long enough, and we are wasting time digging holes, and God is giving us time to use for Him, and we're not doing anything with it. Could I challenge you? Yes, you're busy. Yes, I'm busy. But be faithful with the time the Lord gives you. Be consistent at church. You know, sometimes we say, well, it's been such a busy weekend that I'll go to church. You know, this is a positive thing. As a church, we're growing more committed to regular attendance. But you know, most people here, on average, attend 2 or a little bit over 2 out of 4 Sundays. 2 out of 4, that's 50%. Now, I know some people can't make it. We have shift workers. There's a variety of good reasons not to come. But can I challenge you, if this is the place where we engage with God and His people, make it a priority. Not an afterthought of, oh, it's a little bit cold out there today, I'll stay at home. Or maybe I'll go next week. Be consistent. Turn up early. Turn up early so you can meet with God's people, that you can not just do it during chat time, but maybe before or after spend time with God's people. Be consistent in your growth group attendance. If you're not in a growth group, attend one. That is a great investment of your time as you're building into other people, loving God and loving your neighbor. Be faithful with your time. Be faithful with your talents. Now, I remember at Bible college once taking a nap. I know I'm talking about dreaming and sleeping all the time. I don't do that often. Well, I do it every day, actually. But here's the thing. I remember once waking up from a nap and the phone was ringing, and I got up and my leg was asleep. And I went to get the phone and I went down like a ton of bricks. You see, I had a leg that was designed to do something. It's designed to function, but it was numb and because of its inactivity, it didn't work. Friends, as a body, as a church, and you as a person, you've been designed to be a contributing member of God's body. Not somebody who's numb, not somebody who's just along for the ride, but somebody who is there so that the body might flourish. And that means using your talents, using your God-given gifts and abilities. Now, we know in this parable, there was some people had 5, some people had 2, some people had 1. There's different gifts that God gives us. Not all are the same. But there are multiple ways in this church where you can serve, and you can serve not just in church, but even in other areas of life, when you apply the God-given talents you use to bless other people. You know, one of the reminders I've got here in my pocket, these the keys I have to get into the building. And on them, I've got this little key ring. Now, this key ring, I was just reflecting on this. This key ring here has a picture of missionaries, some of our, or rather global partners, some of our folks who we partner with who are serving the Lord overseas. And it's on this little key ring, but you know where this key ring originated? It originated, first of all, we've got some people here who are serving the Lord overseas. This is fantastic. We partner with them. But then there was somebody in the office, some of maybe even in this room, who printed these, laminated them. We've got a couple of folks who come in every week and will cut these things out so that on a Sunday morning, when we had kids' church, the kids would then take them and they took these and they put them on a smart little key ring so people like me don't forget my keys. So now I'm praying for our global partners. I'm giving thanks for somebody in the office who's cutting these up. I'm thankful to God for our kids' teachers. And I'm praying that the gospel will go out to people. It's all people behind the scenes who are saying, I want to use my time and my talents, even if the talents aren't, we might say, big talents. They're not necessarily 5-bag talents, but people who are willing to serve. You know, we often in this church, we have got so many faithful people, hundreds of faithful volunteers. We have faithful people this morning helping with morning tea, faithful people out in the car park helping us park. We've got people arranging ministries for refugees. We've got people leading this morning our young boys and girls in teaching them the Bible. We have people who lead growth groups and prepare Bible studies. We have people here who are faithfully serving in Jesus Club. Let me ask you, what are you doing with your God-given talents? Are you contributing, or have you buried it? Just on the screen, there's going to be a QR code, and this will come up here, and I think we'll run it after the service as well. But for some of you, you're not serving. You're actually putting your gifts in a hole. Can I encourage you to get out your phone, whether now or after the service, click on this and just indicate that you would like more information about how to give. Because God is going to ask when you come back. When he comes back, he's not going to say, did you get the date right? When he returns, he's going to say, what have you done? He's going to ask, what have you done with his gifts? If you're not currently serving, find out more information. Be faithful with your talents. Don't bury them. Then lastly, be faithful with your treasure. Last week we looked that everything that God gives us comes from him and belongs to him. He's going to require from you, what did you do that which I gave you? And that includes our salaries, whatever they are. Some of you in this room might have 5 bags. Others of you might have 2 bags. Some of you might have 1 bag or even less than a bag. It's not the amount, it's how faithful have you been with what God has given you. You know, if you don't regularly give to ministry, to the work of the Lord, to gospel ministry, can I encourage you, get on our website. Go to your bank details. Set up intentional, regular, faithful giving. Because friends, at the end of the day, God has entrusted that to you so that you might use his money for gospel ministry. Be faithful with your treasure. Friends, I love to dream. And I know that there are some dreams that are good and some dreams that are bad. I do not want to turn up on Judgment Day unprepared because God has given me gifts that I've squandered or not used. God doesn't call us all to be the most gifted people, but God calls each of us to be faithful to his mission. Be faithful with your time, your talents, and your treasure. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for your word, and I just pray that you would challenge our hearts, that you would remind us that you are kind, that you are generous, that we would use our gifts in a way that is appropriate to bring honor to you, that extends your kingdom, that on that last day we would hear as individuals and as your church, well done, good and faithful servants. Equip us to do this for Jesus' sake.